From Australia to Egypt to France, Chinese tourists are traveling abroad in record numbers. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. For countries across the world, summer is generally the height of the tourism season. And this year, millions of Chinese tourists are on the move again, not just inside China, but increasingly around the globe. It's a phenomenon that is transforming the international tourism industry, and it's having a major economic impact too. We begin with this report from CGTN's John Gilmore.
Nowhere seems too far. Chinese tourists here in the Antarctic, taking home precious memories. The number of Chinese traveling around the globe has surged in the last few years. And according to the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute, they took 145 million overseas trips last year alone. From the beaches of Spain to the streets of Paris, Europe is welcoming droves of Chinese tourists. Here in London, there's lots to see, lots to do.
I feel London is very rich in culture, such as its Gothic architectures.
We have been to Cambridge University, Oxford University, the British Museum.
Chinese tourists are part of a wealthier and growing middle class, like these vacationers heading for the cruise ship. In Australia, for the Catch a Crab Company, Chinese visitors mean big business.
A 90% Chinese occupancy in the Chinese New Year period, better known as the Golden Week.
Last year, Australia welcomed more than 1.3 million Chinese tourists who spent over 10 billion Australian dollars. That's more than 7 billion US, and Chinese tourism to Australia is expected to double by 2026. Canada is another major destination, and Canadian tourism representatives have visited China to drum up even more business. Networking, showcasing, marketing.
We want the Chinese traveler to realize that we have a completely different experience.
The Chinese traveler can get another experience in Israel. More than 113,000 visited last year, making China Israel's fastest growing tourist source. There are direct flights to Tel Aviv from Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. In Los Angeles, Chinese tourists are highly sought after too. The U.S. megacity welcomed a record 1.1 million in 2017, spending over $1 billion. Overall, Chinese travelers now account for about 1/5 of all spending by foreign tourists. Figures from the UN World Tourism Organization show that in 2016, Chinese tourists spent $261 billion on international travel. That far exceeds spending by its closest competitors, the US, Germany, and the UK. And all of that Chinese money is providing jobs and a global economic punch.
They're pumping money into our economy, and they're keeping us in business and allowing us to grow.
Washington, D.C. is now marketing in Mandarin. That's delivering top results.
China has become our #1 market.
This tourist is visiting from Xi'an.
I have a very good impression of D.C. It's clean, and the people are very nice.
China's Asian neighbors are top destinations too. In Japan, these tourists are experiencing a traditional tea service. Whether visiting Egypt, the World Cup in Russia, or Thailand, China is now considered the most popular outbound tourist market in the world.
We are very delighted that Hainan Airlines is launching the first ever flights from Ireland to China.
Increasing numbers means airline growth and investment as more destinations are added. Meanwhile, expect China's impact on the global tourism industry to get much bigger. Reports predict the number of Chinese making overseas trips could reach 400 million by 2030. John Gilmore, CGTN, Washington.
Okay, time to bring in our panel. With me here in the studio is Larry Yu. He is Professor of Hospitality Management at the George Washington University. Joining us by Skype from Switzerland is Yong Chen. He is Assistant Professor at the École Hôtelière de Lausanne from London. We're joined by Tom Jenkins. He is the CEO of the European Tourism Association. And joining us from New York is David Becker. He is the CEO of Attract China. His company is geared to increasing the number of Chinese tourists visiting North America. Welcome to all of you to the show. Let's start in the studio with you, Larry. Just a few years ago, just a few million Chinese were traveling overseas. Now it's up to 145 million Chinese tourists. What's behind that massive rise?
Well, there are a number of things really pushing Chinese tourism to visit many different countries. First of all, travel is really part of Chinese culture. And when you look back into the history, from the literature, from the arts, landscapes, and faraway, landscapes, all very attractive to people. And also, there's a Chinese saying, travel 1,000 miles, which is equivalent of reading, 10,000 volumes of books. And so it's part of Chinese culture. But then in the past, to promote the economy, the Chinese government also institutionalized travel holidays by creating a number of long holidays called the week-long Golden Week holidays, and to stimulate the economy. And so that's part of it from the government side. And then another factor is the so-called the pull factor, which is from the destinations and being very aggressive marketing and attracting the Chinese consumers, because the Chinese consumers like to travel and also they like to spend, and especially in shopping. And so there are different forces, different factors really pushing the Chinese outbound tourism to the level today.
So this enables lots of Chinese to travel, Larry, but who's traveling right now? Is the demographic changing? Is it more younger people traveling now?
It's changing. It's changing. In the past, more the baby boomers, and there are more than 200 million of the population, and they're traveling typically in groups and package tours. And because language barriers and unfamiliarity with the culture of the host countries, but now more and more millennials are traveling, and more than 400 million those younger people, professionals, and travel independently, and like to seek deeper experience in destinations and enjoy themselves. And so it's part of the lifestyle of those younger generation. And so clearly there's a changing of the trend in the demand side.
Tom, what about Europe? What kind of growth have you seen in the number of Chinese tourists going to European countries?
Oh, I mean, we've seen, a very steady growth, and this is in no small part aided by the fact that 2018 was declared to be the EU-China Year of Tourism by both the European Commission and the Chinese administration. And this has helped bolster demand. I think this year we're looking forward to growth of about 10% this year, which is fairly consistent. I mean, we've been seeing this pattern really over the last 5 to 10 years. A really, not super spectacular, but very solid, very welcome growth from China.
But that's significant, 10%. Tom, which countries are the Chinese going to? Do they prefer certain countries over others?
Well, I mean, the big volume countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. There is also UK as an outlier. The UK last year saw a huge surge in demand, partly driven by a declining pound. The UK suddenly became a much more attractive buy for the Chinese visitor. But the UK having a different visa system from the rest of Europe means that it's less attractive, inherently less attractive for Chinese, particularly the first-time Chinese visitor, who, whilst we're seeing a growth in the individual Chinese visitors who are coming to do their own thing, the group tour, organized tour, still dominates the European market. it represents about 85% of the volume at the moment.
David, your business is trying to attract Chinese tourists to North America. Let's look at Canada. That's a major market. Let's take a look first at part of Canada's outreach to potential Chinese tourists.
We want Chinese visitors to see everything that Canada has to offer, from the Northern Lights to our amazing East Coast, from our rich cultural heritage and our diverse cities to the unique and unforgettable experiences offered by Indigenous operators across the country. 2018 is our chance to make it all happen. So let me just say, 欢迎.
So, David, how important are Chinese tourists to the US and Canadian markets?
They're extraordinarily important and growing every day. I mean, with the United States as one example, back in 2003, we had less than 300,000 tourists. From China, we expect to have 6.3 million by 2021. And one of the main drivers of both Canadian and U.S. tourism has been making the visa process quite a bit easier, something that the U.K. needs to work on. So the 10-year U.S. visa that was initiated in 2014 has really made it so much simpler for people to go to CITIC Bank in China, get their 10-year visa, and away you go. And so planning that might have been done over a 6-month period can be done in just a few weeks.
Larry, if we look at the tourism business, of course, it's very big for the global economy. How important is Chinese tourism specifically in growing this industry internationally?
Well, the Chinese industry also play a major role in both domestic and international travel, and because the Chinese has transformed its industry, travel industry, substantively in the past, moving from more traditional services to some very innovative online travel services. Right. And so they make searching for different destinations, searching for experience very easy especially for the millennials. And most of their decisions are made based on online search and the travel decisions for different destinations. And so clearly there's some real big e-commerce type online travel agencies like a Ctrip. There are a number of others in different niche kind of markets being very innovative and encouraging and motivating the Chinese visitors to go abroad.
Yongchen, we also have smaller countries and less well-known destinations, like Algeria, for example, which are going after Chinese tourists. Let's watch this part of a report here. Let's watch it.
However, in recent years, with the rapid increase of the number of tourists in China, Algeria government has paid more and more attention to attract Chinese tourists. In addition, Algeria government considers streamlining visa applying procedures to attract more Chinese tourists.
So there we heard that report about the Algerian government, for one, trying to attract more Chinese tourists. Besides North America and Europe, Yongchen, where are Chinese tourists going?
I think, of course, now European destinations are emerging destinations. Besides that, I think Africa should be the next continent that should be really, really appealing to Chinese travelers. But that takes a little bit long time.
Okay, Tom, if we look at Europe again, Hainan Airlines, that's a Chinese airline, they just started direct flights to Ireland and to Scotland. So when you look at that kind of route, you look at the kind of tourist that wants to go to Ireland or Scotland, what kind of experience are Chinese tourists looking for when they get to Europe?
Well, I mean, you're choosing two destinations which are slightly atypical from a European point of view. Both are very rich and rewarding, but in Scotland, obviously, the huge appeal from the Chinese point of view will be recreational, experiential activities, chiefly, notably golf, and the same would be true with Ireland. I think what they're starting to see in the rest of Europe is a much more more of a focus, not simply on taking photographs of famous attractions and shopping, though shopping we think will still be a very important part of the holiday experience. You're starting to see a real interest in what actually happens in Europe and how Europeans experience Europe. So you're starting to see more visits, rather strangely, to farms and to see specific craft works taking place. So people are getting deeper into the culture of Europe, and this is obviously to be welcomed.
David, as we heard from Larry earlier on, many of the Chinese tourists now traveling abroad are young. They're very much part of the digital age. How important is social media and modern technology in marketing to young Chinese? For instance, we know that Washington, D.C., where I am right now, is marketing itself directly on WeChat, which is a very popular messenger app in China.
WeChat, as I describe it, is the super app of China, and people use it, dozens, if not hundreds of times a day. It cannot be undervalued or underplayed. In China, as I'm sure you know, the popular U.S. social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are actually not available. So when people are looking for information about a destination, they're going to turn to WeChat and sign a Weibo. And when you tie in WeChat Pay, now you actually never have to take out your wallet. So one of the things that we strongly recommend to destinations and to retailers, shopping centers, is to implement WeChat Pay and also Alipay, because it's the way that most Chinese are used to paying for most things, on a daily basis. You want to make it easy for people to enjoy their stay and what we call being China-friendly or China-ready, and that applies to payment, that applies to social media, it applies to things that may take place as you enter the hotel or enter your hotel room.